going.
Nice, honey.
I survived.
The context of our discussion tonight, we're talking about anchor building, but specifically anchor tying. And so what I mean by that is I'm not really going to talk a lot about the placement of pieces and placing gear. That's a really hard thing to do online. I have a basics of trad climbing webinar that just kind of introduces the parts of the cam and nuts and some considerations. So you could check that out. So I'm not going to talk about much about that. I'm a little bit more specifically talking about how we tie it. So the assumption would be, and the context would be, we already have three or more good or bomber pieces, and now we're tying it together. And that's our focus tonight, all these different ways to tie. And we'll get into that a little bit more. We're talking about 5th class rock climbing, okay? Why do I emphasize that? Well, if it's 4th class scrambling, you might do things differently. You might just do, and then if we're alpine climbing, it might be a little bit, or like alpine meaning snow climbing, snow and ice and stuff, the game might be a little bit different. So I'm just kind of like boiling the conversation down a little bit. And then for the most part, we're going to talk about 3-piece anchors. You might see me demoing stuff on like these 2 little bolts, and just for the simplicity of showing some things. But the idea is we're talking about kind of multi-pitch trad anchors, which are typically going to be 3 or more pieces of gear. Now, whenever I talk about this, the question comes up, can't you build a 2-piece trad anchor? And my kind of flippant answer to that is usually, if you have to ask the question, the answer is no. Of course, you can build a 2-piece trad anchor. I've done it a few times in my climbing career. But yeah, I build 3 or more piece gear anchors. And we could get in the weeds about 2-piece anchors and when it's appropriate or when it's not. But I personally don't do it very much. I haven't found the need to in my climbing career. And you know, over thousands and thousands and thousands of pitches, so you probably don't really need to either. And if you can't assess that for yourself, whether that's okay or not, then maybe you don't have the experience yet to be applying that technique. So yeah, we're not going to talk, although I might demo on like 2 bolt anchors, and I might give some comments on that. 2 bolt anchors, really hard to beat a quad setup. Really hard to beat a quad on 2 bolts, especially when you're going to go 2 bolts to another 2 bolt anchor, to another 2 bolt anchor, to another 2 bolt anchor, like we will in El Portero Chico. It's all sport climbing. Not a great for anchoring creativity, but an amazing place to work on efficiency, leading, rescue, rappel efficiency, all that sort of stuff. So come join us out there. Quad, I'm not going to show it, but maybe you've had some exposure. Feel free to Google it. I do have another webinar that's single pitch anchors and anchor cleaning. So that's a little bit more of a single pitch environment, but that does talk about a quad if you'd like to check that out. It's cool to have all these to reference. We're building quite a library. So that's the context for our discussion. 5th class rock climbing, multi-pitch, multiple pieces of trad gear. It could be helpful for you to have a piece of cord with you. Maybe you're, I don't know, sitting at your desk, you could maybe play with some of this stuff. If you have a cordelette or some slings and some couple carabiners with you, might be fun to kind of like play along at home. But my goal tonight is not necessarily to like, I usually try not to do this style of teaching where I'm just kind of like rapid firing like a bunch of tricks at you, because that doesn't seem super helpful. But I actually think in this context it is, because I think it'll just expose you to a lot of new ways of thinking about anchor tying, and then encourage you to think more creatively about how you're tying your master points when you're climbing, and give you some new considerations. So it is going to be a little bit more of this rapid fire style, which I think will be kind of interesting. And yes, you'll learn some individual things, but I think it'll also just kind of free you up to be up there and be like, hey, why don't I give this a try? And some people get freaked out when I start talking like that. They're like, I need to do things that are in a textbook, that have been taught by guides, and that's the only way I'm safe. And that's not how this works. That's not how climbing works. They're very simple systems. You're smart. you can look at this stuff and determine if it makes sense or not. There's no magic, there's no boogeyman, there's no, oh, if I do, an overhand knot's okay in the climbing rope, but if I tie it in a Dyneema sling, I'm going to die. No, there's margin built into our climbing equipment and the systems we use. So, there are some like things you'd want to avoid, but there is, you can think and think for yourself and determine if things make sense or not. I think I'll get into that a bit more too. So kind of little zoom out here. So anchor building is obviously critically important part of what we do with climbing. So to kind of review perhaps some of the like anchor building principles. Now, when I say that, things that come to mind are these acronyms like serene, earnest. I don't know if people have heard other ones, but there's a lot of them, and they have concepts like equalization, the angle, redundancy, extension, security, timeliness. I've heard even like rigidity of your anchor. That's, I think, more of a rescue application, professional rescue application. All these kind of principles, and I don't really like that, to be honest. And you can check out the other webinar for me to kind of make fun of all that stuff a little bit more. Not make fun of it, but just kind of break it down. Really, what's the most critically important thing when we build anchors? Does anyone know? Does anyone want to throw it in the chat? What is the number one most important thing when you think of all those acronyms? What matters the most? If you had nothing else and you could just have one thing, what would it be? Redundancy. Okay, cool, Tim. Thanks for chiming in. Solid gear. Awesome. Any other thoughts from folks? Solid rock. I like that a lot. Rock quality. Fantastic. Great. Cool. So those were fantastic. And so I get a lot of people will say stuff like equalization, which is really not the concern. So to me, and hopefully you can see as I write here, I'll probably clean this up. Maybe I'll write over here. So to me, the most important thing is solid. Okay, and that's going to apply, you can see that, I hope. And that's going to apply to two things when we come to solid. And well, basically, it's one thing. Solid individual anchor points, which is exactly what ASDF said. Solid gear. We need good and bomber placements to build a good anchor. If we don't have good gear, no matter what you do next, your anchor is crap and you're in a dangerous situation. Okay, so solid gear, and a prerequisite for solid gear is what we also commented on, which is rock quality, right? So it's got to be solid gear, which a prerequisite for that is that it's in solid rock and good rock quality. So solid is number one, and then that has to be first place, right? And Tim, for me, a second place, and there's only two places here for me. I don't need a 5-letter word acronym thing. For me, right after solid is redundancy. So I'll write that as well. I don't even know if you can see that, but and Tim, it makes sense why that's the case, right? Because we can have redundancy. If I have something crappy backed up by something crappy, well, it's just crappy, right? Thanks, Chris. So yeah, we have to start with solid because, and another point to this, Tim, is, right, if we have one bomber tree at the top of the cliff, at the top of the multi-pitch, one solid pine tree, well, we don't use redundancy there, right? We use the one solid tree. But for me, redundancy is super important. And I break redundancy down into three kind of sub things, which would be, I want redundancy, and I think this is going to be the one I'm hammering on tonight. I want redundancy in three things, okay? One is my material. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when I finish tying my anchor, I want to have, if something of this were to fail or be damaged or to have gotten battery acid on it from my trunk or whatever, I want there to be something else. So, for example, this is like a very kind of boring, simple anchor, right? It's clip, clip, bring down, tie a knot. And so what I end up with, and it's a little tight here, but right, I have redundancy in my material. If this fails, I have the other leg. And importantly, in my master point here, I have two strands. So I have redundancy in my material. That's something I'm gonna pick on tonight. That's something we have to worry about when we're getting creative. And then I also want redundancy in my anchor points. Now, redundancy, I maybe didn't emphasize this enough, is not, we don't always strive for this in climbing, right? We're belayed by one belayer with one belay device connected to one carabiner on one belay loop, tied into one rope, right? So we don't always have redundancy, but it's something we strive for. For example, material, if I'm using my climbing rope to build the anchor, I don't need it doubled up because it's a climbing rope. So hopefully that makes sense. And these redundancy also can get wishy-washy in these next two. So my individual anchor points, I strive for redundancy. I want redundancy. I don't need it, right? Because I might have that one bomber tree, that one big boulder. So I strive for redundancy in my anchor points. And then I also strive for redundancy, but don't always have the option and definitely don't always need it, to have redundancy in the rock. Not POC, rock. And so what I mean by that is, I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket necessarily, right? This is gray area. It's not all black and white. Ideally, I'm putting my pieces of gear in different rock. Now, sometimes it's just a crack in the mountain. It's very solid, and you should be able to assess rock quality. Kind of, that's what you're doing as you learn to trad climb, right? So you should be able to just say, like, this is really solid crack in the mountain. It's okay if I put all my gear in this crack because it's literally the mountain. Versus you have kind of this, Jenga puzzle blocks, in a chimney, and it's all flakes and stuff. That's when it's like, ugh, I really want to diversify and I want to try and, get maybe most of my gear in this. There's a solid crack. I have two kind of options here. And then, yeah, maybe I'll put one in kind of the bigger blocks over here or something. So I want to try and diversify so that if one rock shifts, I don't end up with everything falling apart. So again, these are things we strive for redundancy. We need solid, period. If you don't have solid gear, keep climbing till you can find it. Climb back down to your last solid piece and build an anchor from there. Okay? Do not bring somebody up on poor quality gear. I don't care if you have all the tips on how to equalize and all that crap. You can't polish a turd and you can't equalize bad gear into a good anchor, period. End of sentence. So we need that. And then redundancy we strive for. I don't need redundant material if I'm using the rope. I don't need redundant points if I'm using a bomber tree. I don't need redundant rock if it's a crack in the mountain and that's what my gear is in. So cool, that's a bit of review. And once we've ticked those boxes, we have three good pieces. Then if we have three good pieces in the rock, pretty much no matter what we do, no matter how we tie them together, we have a good anchor. So that kind of bends people's brains a little bit when I say that, because you really get like hammered about like these ways to tie and you got to do it like this and then there's this method, and we focus so much, and I think that's a detriment to new climbers when we talk about all this rigging trickery and equalization tricks and all this stuff. And I'm going to perpetuate it tonight because I'm going to show a lot of these tricks. They're not really equalization tricks. In fact, they're going to kind of spit in the face of that a little bit. I slightly lost my train of thought. Once we have those three good pieces, it really doesn't matter how we connect them. It's going to be okay. And this is where I see so many people when I teach our more advanced multi-pitch courses. So we have our intro to multi-pitch. We also have our multi-pitch beyond the basics course that's more about efficiency. I see people place the gear and take your time with that. Make sure it's good. But then I see people just fiddling and faffing and tweaking and when trying to bring those 3 pieces, 4 pieces to 1 point. And really at that point, the hard stuff's done. Just tie it together. Let's get a move on. So yeah, so that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about how to kind of tie these all together and some considerations and some tricks that are going to help us in these various situations. So cool. So what we're going to be focusing more on tonight is not so much this, again, kind of reference the other webinar, come to my Intro to Trad course if you're newer to that. We're going to talk about 2 things. The main thing is I try to kind of break it down into more things, but I think this is it. And these might sound silly, but I think they're going to make a lot of sense as we break them down. But we want an anchor that's comfortable to use and efficient. So it's comfortable to use and it's efficient both in time, but also in material. So I'm not having to pull out 3 different things off my harness to build the anchor. That's not timely and that's not efficient with material. And I want my anchor to be comfortable. Now that sounds kind of silly, but that's what we're talking about. We've got the safety covered. We covered safety here when we placed the gear. Now we're being stylistic and we're striving for kind of comfort and efficiency. Cool. So like I said, I want to show you a lot of these tips and in consideration so that you can apply some of them, but also just generally be more creative and think for yourself. It's really fun. I love anchor building. I love it. I hate when I get to the stance and there's 2 bolts. I'm like, dang it, I really wanted to like figure something out. And there's something rewarding to me about climbing a wall of rock where no one had to come before you, no one had to place bolts for you. I just find that really kind of like, yeah, just self-reliant and really rewarding. And we have so much of that here in California. I know, we're based in California. I know there's people from all over the country and we've had people from all over the world at these webinars, but our audience is generally California. So a lot of our classic climbing areas are like that. Lover's Leap comes to mind, certainly plenty of routes in Yosemite come to mind. So yeah, I really enjoy that. So yeah, and to reiterate, all those little fiddlings, all those little adjustments, all those little, inches here and there when you're tying the anchor that are taking you a really long time to sort out, none of that matters, right? And if you want me to break that down more, check out that other webinar, right? But if you end up with all the force on one piece, that's okay because the other pieces are there if that were to fail. And the reality of when you pull test and you test the amount of force on things, when you equalize it, is ultimately one piece gets all the load anyway. So it's not worth fiddling, right? That little 1 inch of slack or whatever that you're taking minutes to try and solve, that doesn't matter. If it did matter, there'd be so many more fatalities in climbing, so many more, and none of us would do it because it'd be horrifying. We have the margins built in. And that other webinar goes into that in depth. So cool. So I'm going to share some tips for comfort and efficiency. And that doesn't sound critically important. This stuff is, but I think I've hammered that about as much as I can without getting out on the rock with you guys and teaching you in a smaller group and stuff. So I'm just kind of making some space here. I might write some more. So some things we can strive for, like we said, is comfort and efficiency. So when it comes to comfort, and comfort is important, actually. And I'll break it down a little bit. But when it comes to comfort, we want where should I write? Because I'm going to be doing stuff here. I'll keep writing over here. We want a high master point. Now, remember, these considerations are after we've gotten the bomber gear in. Given the option, I'm going to look for gear high because that's going to help me finish with a high master point. But if all you can get is like stuff that's low, well, that's what you have to use, right? This comes first. That's number one, right? Redundancy, I think, is number two. And these aren't even numbered. Comfort and efficiency aren't even numbered because they're not safety things, right? They're stylistic things. So, but I will generally look for higher anchor points. When I get to a stance that I think is comfortable, I kind of look kind of high. I'm not climbing up necessarily, but just kind of high if I'm given the option. So I want a high master point. This is something in guide training they teach you like right away, high master point. So I'm going to write that down. I'm just going to say MP. That's kind of what we're striving for. And why is that? Get there in my notes. So I might even start kind of building some stuff. But if I build a high master point, and this is not very high, what I have here relative to me, right? It's kind of like belly button height, but it's okay, right? And very easily, here's just an example of how I can make this higher. There's higher, you know, for one example. And I'm doing that on bolts, but you could apply the same to cams, go into the thumb loops as opposed to coming into the slings, right? But anyway, if I go for a higher master point, when I'm belaying off of this point, right, I'm standing here on this ledge, I'm going to have more throw in my belay, right? More kind of ability to take in. If I have this really low, and, you know, I see this sort of stuff all the time, and usually it's people that only have kind of like one tool in their toolbox for building anchors. And they're like, well, I always build anchors with my cordelet. And so that's what I'm going to use. So this is a triple length sling, right? And if I were to build out of this, and I know I'm showing on 2 points, but all these concepts apply, right? They would just, okay, well, that's the sling I grabbed. So now my master point's all the way down here off the screen, and I'm trying to stand on this ledge, and now I'm hunching over to belay. And it's just harder to belay that way. It's really uncomfortable, which, you know, our comfort is important. It's harder to give an effective belay. It's harder to pull somebody tight. It's also harder if my master point is way low. It's harder for me to effect a rescue. How am I going to do any skills? How am I going to do a haul system? How am I going to do a belay escape, et cetera, if I'm hunched over like that? So yes, I'm talking comfort, but it's actually kind of safety, because if I have this nice and high, it's a really good place to work off of things. So it's safer to build a higher master point if you follow my logic there. I think that makes sense. A higher master point also gives me more options for which stance I'm going to use, where I'm going to position myself, right? If this is my master point all the way down here, well, I'm probably going to end up below that, right? And if I'm here, obviously I'm standing on the ground right now, but if I'm on the ledge, I want to end up with my master point above my waist so that I can stay on this comfortable ledge, right? And so by building as high as I can, and this is not as high as I can go on this. I'm just not going to start to break down too many tips here. Right, I can position myself where I want. I have much more options. And that's also what I like why I like to clove in as opposed to use a personal anchor system. Nothing wrong with using a tether. Really nothing wrong. Obviously, you should be able to do this as well, clove in. And yeah, when your PAS is going to make you off the nice stance, clove in so that you can stand or even sit on the nice stance and be really comfortable. If I end up like building with like middle height pieces and then extending, I see so many people kind of like dangling off of a ledge when it's like they should be belaying on the ledge or on the good stance. So the higher my master point is, the more options I kind of have of where I want to position myself and stance myself, which again is comfort, and comfort is safety. A, because of, it's easier to build systems and rescue systems if I'm standing, but also the more comfortable I am over time, the kind of the safer, the more energy you conserve and the safer you are in your outing in general. If you're hanging every time at hanging stances when you don't need to be, it's a way more exhausting day than if you're putting yourself on comfortable ledges. So if you take only one thing from tonight, that's what it should be. Okay. I mean, this is what it should be, solid. But as far as the main topic tonight, high master point, that's what we're kind of striving for. Cool. And that's kind of where we're with comfort. And then we're also going for efficiency in time and in material, right? And what I mean by material is trying not to use a lot of different things. And then trying to, whatever I'm trying to use, let's say it's this triple length sling, being able to grab the triple length, realize it's not quite long enough, or maybe it's too long, and quickly make an adaptation. So I still use this, but I make this shorter or longer. And you're like, well, it's as long as it is. What do you mean make it shorter or longer? And that's what we'll get into when we get into all these tips. It's ways to make things shorter or longer. And so I don't have to put this away, grab something else, etc., which is time inefficient. And also I'm not using this plus something else, plus something else, plus something else, and I end up with this rat's nest. And then I have nothing on my harness if I do need to do a rescue, or to build the next anchor, or for the next pitch of climbing, whatever it might be. So trying to deploy less off of your harness, and therefore have less to clean. And then of course it's more timely. And again, neither of these things are high level priorities. Solid and safe, right? Solid anchor points is priority number one. Okay. But these other things are considerations too, right? And yeah, as you climb longer and longer, it's like, yeah, you want to learn these subtleties. And I think a lot of recreational climbers, maybe they take a course, an intro course in something, and yeah, that's going to be the focus. And if it's a good course, hopefully that's the focus. If it's a good course, they might just drown you in theoretical BS and equalization crap when we should be focusing on this. But yeah, a lot of people don't kind of get continuing education, which is why these webinars are such a joy to do, because I feel like I get to provide more continuing ed and more intermediate kind of considerations. So, so cool. So comfort and efficiency, hopefully you kind of buy into those being important. Timeliness is really important. If you're trying to climb, it doesn't matter how long it is. Royal Arches, say. I mean, that's a classic long climb. That's kind of like, I'd say, a proud route to get done for most folks, because I forget, I've done it a few times. I think it's like 15 pitches or something, right? And like, that's really cool, but you're building a lot of anchors. And if each anchor is taking you, 5 minutes, which I think for a lot of people, that's actually sounds pretty quick to a lot of people, I think. That's almost an hour of just building anchors, not to mention taking them down, right? And so timeliness is safety, helps you stay out of the dark, avoid storms, etc. Cool. Nobody's cried foul about anything I'm saying. That's pretty nice. That's good. It's totally fair. You can absolutely push back. Something I don't think I said in my intro is I'm not trying to like that the word proselytize or preach. I'm just sharing information that you should integrate into what you know, what you've learned, what you've experienced, and just mix it in, mull it over, and see what you think. I'm not saying this is the way, but I'm not going to show you anything that I wouldn't do and that I haven't done, at least hundreds of times. For realsies. So, but just mix it in. Just mix it into your knowledge base and your experience level, right? Cool. So here we go. We're going to start getting into me kind of like rattling off some tips. We're about halfway in, so I think that's going to work out. I hope. I don't know. We'll see. And I'm going to rattle off some tips. So I might try and keep a tally here, right? Because I mentioned 142,506. That's if I give you 30 tips, 30 different things that you can apply 5 different ways in an anchor. So 3 pieces of gear, you could apply 1 to each. Potentially, you could apply 1 to the piece of material, and then you could apply 1 to your knot, maybe. Anyway, so I might keep track just for fun. But as I give you these tips, the key is basically you don't have to lock in on any individual one. You don't have to make a list and try and remember them all. I did not learn any of these from a book. I seriously didn't. Yeah. I just made it. I made it up. And like I might just see everyone log off right now, but I've used them again hundreds, thousands of times, and it just makes sense. So, and I want you to be creative, and I want you to think for yourself, because the more you think for yourself, the more you build something and consider it, the more you learn, the more you understand, um, and then the more effective technician you are of these skills. And so you aren't an idiot. You can look at these very simple systems and decide if they work or not. And I want to encourage something I call, and it's not my idea. It's from a professional guide, pro climber, just legend. His name's Will Gadd. I think newer climbers aren't super familiar with him, but he has this concept, the positive power of negative thinking. And if you've been to any of my courses in person, you've heard me talk about this. So not positive thinking, I hope this is going to be fine. I bet it's okay, right? I can do this. It'll all work out. That's positive thinking. That's not so good. That doesn't work against the mountains. But what does work is negative thinking. The positive power of negative thinking. What could go wrong? What if this cuts? What if this fails? What if this? What if that? You know, okay, if that, then this happens. Okay, so I'm good there. Okay, what if I do fall getting to my first piece and it's a fall factor 2? Oh, that'd be really bad. Okay, so how can I protect against that risk, right? So by thinking negatively and being a bit paranoid, we can protect ourselves more effectively from hazards. And that's something I've applied personally in my climbing, in other adventure sports that I do, and I find it extremely helpful to cover my bases like that. So that's something you can apply when you're anchor building as well. Be a bit paranoid. And acknowledge that sometimes when you're doing this stuff for the first time, yeah, it's going to take you potentially a little bit longer as you're thinking through things. But over time, you'll build a toolbox that you'll be able to deploy and be really slick. Cool. So that was kind of my intro to the tips I'm going to share with you. And now I'm going to start getting into some and actually showing some stuff here. Maybe if you have, a cord or a sling and some, you probably only need two points, and you can play with everything on 2 points if you'd like. But cool. Let me maybe tidy this up a little bit. So I just kind of gave myself a handful of clipping points to help me demonstrate all of these. I'll use kind of a few of them. What's my first one? Okay. So I can use kind of various points to help illustrate what I'm going to do, right? Because you don't know where your gear is going to be. And so it might be high or low or wide or near each other or far, whatever it might be. So this thing's super awesome, this little crack. It's not intended for practicing gear placements, but it helps for that. I use it on our crack climbing clinics, which Chris went to in the fall this year, and it's just such an awesome teacher for these jams. Shout out to Tim, who makes these Witch Tiger hardware. If you want to train hand jams, ring locks, all sorts of cool stuff. But it's a nice visual for these cam placements as well. And then I also have some nuts sticking out of the wall over here, and maybe I'll play with those as well. Okay, so I'm carrying on, you can't really see my harness, so there's nothing exciting going on. But what I think something to talk about is what, what do you bring for anchor building? And I think that would be a reasonable question. And it's just the answer is like with everything, it just depends, right? What are you doing? What is your objective? How far from the road are you? How far from help are you? But just I would say this is kind of a relatively standard kind of multi-pitch trad, maybe a little on the heavy side for me and my level of skill with rescue. So when it comes to anchor building material, it's kind of like the fall factor 2 thing. Yes, we bring things to build anchors, but what we really bring things for is to potentially affect a rescue if needed. And it's again, a positive power, negative thinking. It's not what we're bringing for everything to go right. We're bringing what happens if things are going wrong. We need to have stuff for that. So just for an example here, and again, I don't want to get into the weeds about this stuff, but I have a double length sling, a triple length sling, a quadruple length sling, and then I have this is 20 feet of cord, which is much longer than I normally carry. This is kind of a new cord, and I haven't cut it down to my usual length. But I haven't felt the need to cut it down because it's so compact. This is I think it's 5 mil. This is 5 mil cord. I forget exactly the brand name of this. Now, if your cordelette is 7 millimeters thick, that's good. If you're using nylon, it has to be 7 millimeters thick. We lose a ton of strength when we drop down to 6. But this isn't nylon. The core of this is actually, you see this kind of like yellowish color. That's Kevlar. So you can find Kevlar core cord or Dyneema core cord. And so it's called Tech cord. Yep. Super, super strong. And so we can carry it down to 5 mil, which makes 20 feet a compact package, which is super cool. 20 feet of nylon is like super bulky. So I really like this stuff. It is more expensive, but something to consider. And then I have a prusik on here. And this is personally how I like to carry my stuff. It's on this little slide lock carabiner. I like it bundled like this because it's easy to sift through things. Yada yada. We're getting into the weeds a little bit. And then other anchor building stuff. I try not to carry a ton of carabiners. I have people come to my courses trying to progress their trad climbing, and they're setting off on a single pitch trad route with 13 lockers on their harness. We don't need 13 lockers ever for anything. I don't care how, big wall climbing, maybe in your whole team, you probably have 13 lockers when you got the haul bag rigged up and everything. But yeah, so, like a couple HMS pair style carabiners, right? A couple D-shaped carabiners, modified D lockers, right? I'll try not to get into my rant about carabiner shapes. Can maybe get into that in the Q&A. And then I think super helpful for anchor building as well is a couple of loose non-lockers, right? So that's kind of what I got on me right here. I also have, a quick draw and a couple alpine draws on me. Just, I feel like this is kind of standard stuff. And these are things we can employ in our anchor building. Now we might take it away from the leader of the next pitch, but so we might want to not get too carried away using quick draws and alpine draws. Cool. All right. My first set of tips is going to be about how to make a cord or a sling longer. Okay, and you're thinking to yourself, again, like a sling is only as long as it is. And no, you're wrong. I can make it longer by using different techniques. Okay, so I'm going to start here with a double length sling. And I'm going to use these points here, and maybe, yeah, I'll just use what's on my harness. So where'd those friggin' carabiners go? Okay, cool. So I'll give you an example here. So if I try, I might have to fiddle with this a little bit. So here are my 3 pieces I'm going to use. Boom, 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 clip, clip, clip. Right? This is our standard anchor building, right? We clip everything and then we pull down the strands in between and then we tie a knot. Well, shit. Oh, I swore. I can't tie an overhand here. And this is so frustrating, right? You're like, I can't quite finish. Oh, shoot, I just can't. Let's say I just can't tie an overhand here, right? So I can't finish my master point. And this is the situation we find ourselves in. And then it's like, okay, now I have to go to my bigger piece of cord. I have to put this away. And these are going to be these tricks to make this cord or sling longer. So this is so we don't have to incorporate possibly a lot more material or just fight with things for a long time. So this making things longer. Now I said we want a high master point, but making things just a little bit longer can let me use the highest point, right? Because if I have to go to a triple length sling, now I'm going to end up down here. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, making a sling longer. So I put these in no particular order. I think this is actually probably not the best one to start with, but here's an example of how to make this sling longer. I'm going to put a clove hitch up here. Now that actually makes the sling shorter because knots make it shorter. But then I'm going to use another clove hitch, an inline clove right here. And I could actually do this. I could do it in one strand, but I can do it in two as well. So this also shortens the material. But now you'll see I can pretty easily tie this overhand. Now, what happened there? Well, in the first system, in the first way I tied it, right, I went up and down and up and down and up and down, and then doing inline cloves, which I generally do it with a single strand here, and this also works. Makes it even longer if I just do it in a single. These kind of inline clove hitches, look at all this length I have all the way down to here. Hopefully you don't hear that banging too much in my microphone. And now look at this. I tied a big master point, lots of room. So what's going on here, right, is I found a different way to incorporate these two pieces, right? And so this we could almost ignore this leg here. I'm just on this clove and then this clove and then here, right? Because if this were to fail, I'm on that. There's no like extension, no kind of quote unquote shock loading. If this fails up here, I'm on this, right? And so it's a way I didn't have to go up and down to each anchor component, right? So that's one way to make this exact same length sling longer. I call that inline cloves. And the first way I showed where I tied both of these strands in a clove here, that also made things a little bit longer. Look at that, all the way down to there. Plenty to tie my knot. And if I'm cloving in both strands, I don't need the clove up here. Anyway, I don't want to get necessarily into the weeds with any one method, and then that's going to make my sling a little bit longer. So that's one way to make things longer. Let's start the tip tally. Well, I showed kind of multiple ways to do it, but we'll just say that's one tip. I'm kind of curious how many I get through here. I wrote at least 30 down. Great. So another way to make things longer is I can bring multiple pieces together with another piece of material. Now this is using another piece of material, but that might be what you need to do to make your sling longer. So for example, these two cams right here. Well, I can't quite, I mean, I kind of could, but I can't really get them together. And so I'll take another thing, a quick draw say, and bring those two to be one. And then, I could even use probably a single length sling at this point, right? These two cams came down now to 1 point. And then I'm building a 3-piece anchor out of a single length sling. And this one's a bit of a fight to get my overhand in there. right? So using something else, and again, I'm doing this all on a smaller scale, but this is a super common one trad climbing. You've got two pieces here and then two pieces over here. And it's like, well, instead of having to go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down to each of the four pieces, bring two to one, and then finish it off, right? I think that's pretty basic. So I'm going to tally that one up as a tip. And then I'm going to tally this one up too. I could barely finish my overhand here. And so I'm not going to be able to fit more carabiners in here. And so I'm just going to lock this up. And this is going to be my master carabiner. And then I'm going to like, I could close myself into that if we were swinging leads. But if we're not swinging leads, I can just use this as a, right? I have much more space in here than in here. And then I can belay off of here as well. And then my partner comes up, right? And they PAS into here as well. So that's a master carabiner. So I don't need to necessarily get as big of a loop. So I'm giving myself a tip for that one. Cool. Like I said, these are in no particular order. We're going to keep rolling. So another method to make a piece of material longer, let me tidy up a little bit. And this is a big piece of advice for you all that I would highly recommend you consider is your cordelette, which I think most climbers carry a cordelette. Keep it open. What do I mean by that? I mean, this is not in a loop. This is open, if I can get there. These are my two ends. They're not tied together, okay? They're frayed. They look frayed. You can't melt Kevlar. That's kind of the point. That's why fire hoses are made out of them. Fire department hoses, and that's why, you know, dedicated friction hitches are made out of them. And so my ends are a little, they look frayed, but I could tidy them up. But anyway, so boom, if you let your cordelette live with this welded double fisherman's, which most people have, right? They have a double fisherman's in there. They've never taken it out, and it's just welded. Well, it's going to be really hard to untie it in the event that you want to use your entire cordelette, right? And that effectively turns your 20-foot cord into 10 feet of cord. So leave your cord open, and then it's 20 feet of usable cord, right? And I can use like way spread apart anchor points. Now, these aren't particularly way spread apart, but like, I mean, I could just, right? So I can tie an overhand in the end here. Honestly, figure eights are preferable towards the end of a piece of material, but let's not get in the weeds, Kevin, right? And then I can tie another overhand here. Overhands are more material efficient. A figure eight takes up more material. Right? And like my cordelette's like on the ground, but look, I could boom, hit this guy, and where'd my other locker go? Anyway, I can hit like all of these points with this wide open cordelette. Now there's going to be a lot of friction in here as I try and bring these together. I might pull my wall down. Is that off the screen? It is, right? But, and this, I wouldn't build an anchor like this necessarily, but, oh, my wall is coming down. Right, so maybe I want to try and, maybe I'm not psyched on the rock quality. Oh, and I missed these, bringing these down, but maybe I'm not psyched on the rock quality, and so I want to spread things out, right? And if your cordelette is tied into a loop, you're hamstringing yourself. You're carrying all this stuff, but you can't use it. You can't use its effective length. And then check this out. So I highly, highly, highly recommend you carry your cord open. So do we need to consider the angle on this rightmost piece? Not really. So angle is not really one of my considerations when it comes to anchor building. Angle, So the theory with angle is as the angle gets more and more open and approaches, right, 180-degree angle between my points, as the angle approaches 180, the force multiplication approaches infinity, which is crazy, but that's how it works out. Now, in theory, but yes, you would consider the angle, but I'd rather have, if that's my solid piece, I'm going to take my solid piece. And it's okay if I multiply force onto that a little bit because it's solid. I'm not going to prioritize angle and be like, oh, instead of using that really solid piece that's going to give me a 98-degree angle, I'm going to use this crappy piece in here that's going to give me a better angle. So I wouldn't worry so much about angle. There's a whole sport made out of this, building an 180-degree angle anchor. It's called slacklining and highlining, right? And when those people stand on a high line, they don't rip the world apart with their infinite multiplication. But very good question. Angle is something to consider. I strive to keep the angle, say, under 100 degrees, but it's not really a focus. The focus is solid. And redundancy in my rock and in my points. So super good question, Amy. And the reality is this equipment should be able to, I should be able to put double the amount of force on it and still have it hold. It's strong enough. Hopefully that answers your question. Very, very, very good question, especially in that situation where I had a lot going on. If I only had two pieces in a massive angle, there's a force multiplication. Any angle above 0 degrees starts to multiply force because the 2 points they don't just pull against the load being applied to them. If I pull down, these aren't just resisting the downward pull, right? If I pull down here, they're actually pulling against each other. And so that's what starts to happen is these anchor points actually have to start pulling against each other and fighting each other. So yeah, fantastic question. Hopefully that's a helpful answer. Cool. So cordelet open, and then now you're thinking, well, like, what if I want to tie it in a loop? Well, check this out. One method is I could take these and clip them both to the same spot, and voila, it's a loop. Right? By clipping those two overhands on the end, I've turned my cordelet back into a loop, and I'm being dramatic here with all these placements because trying to make my cordelet not like totally out of frame and way too long. I might have even missed, I think I missed that guy. Boom, I can go back to a loop. That's one method, right? I can clip these two bunny ears to the same spot. Here's another method to turn it into a loop. You can use your double fisherman's. I don't like to because the double fisherman's is so like time consuming and fiddly to tie and then annoying to untie and it gets welded. I do what's called a flat overhand knot, which is I take both ends. Well, I'm going to give myself a tip tally for the clipping both ends in. And then this is another tip tally. This is actually how to make your material shorter though. Take my two ends. This is the same knot we use to connect two ropes rappelling. Flat overhand. I just tie an overhand knot. Super fast and no big deal, right? Boom. Now, when I'm rappelling on this, I'm pretty worried about it. I'm going to be tensioning every individual strand when I'm tying two knots together to rappel. This is actually the weakest, crappiest knot we use in rock climbing. The flat overhand, also called the asymmetric overhand, also called the Euro death knot. We really shouldn't call it that. But now we're getting in the weeds into some more rappelling stuff. But that's called a flat overhand. And that's what I use because it's super quick to use. And why am I using the worst knot in rock climbing in my anchors? Well, because I have redundancy. If this were to start rolling, which is how these fail, I got other stuff going on. I have redundancy in my material, which is super, super important and helps allow me to get creative. And so that's a really fast one to tie and untie. Seeing some things come into the chat. Untying my welded tech cord fisherman's right now. Yep. Cool. And Julie asks, for efficiency, would it be okay to maintain the figure 8 bunny ears when cleaning the anchors to reuse on the next anchor? So like in the ends of the cord here, right? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, you could totally leave those in. I generally don't. I generally take those out. It's not super often I'm using my cord like this. And when we get to ways I make things shorter, I'll talk about what I do find myself doing a little more regularly. But yeah, you could leave those in. Cool. So did I give myself a tally for the EDK? Or I shouldn't call it that, the asymmetric overhand or the flat overhand? I think I did. Cool. All right. I need to move a lot faster. We did it, Kev. We always do this. We think the topic's not big. Okay, cool. So open cordelette, another way to make your material longer. I'll get to shorter as well, and maybe I'll have to skip some of mine. Now, is the knot choice you use in your master point. So to make my material longer, right, I'll use, and I'm showing, I'm showing 2 pieces, but this is supposed to be more of a 3-piece trad kind of discussion. Get the bar tack out of the way. So to make your material longer, use an overhand knot because it takes up less material than a figure 8 knot, right? So I'm giving myself one for that. Now, use an overhand knot. Well, what uses even less material than an overhand knot, right? You get into this situation and you're like, wait, it was this situation over here, right? With a double length, we just couldn't really even tie an overhand. What uses less material than an overhand? Trick question. It's not a knot, it's a hitch. The girth hitch master point. Super hot. Yeah, nice. Amy's got it. Girth hitch master point. So they say it's preferable that you twist one of the strands or something. I never really worry about that, to be honest. And I think when you're doing it in 3 or more pieces, you're getting twists going on anyway. But anyway, girth hitch master point. So something that helped me learn it was nothing gets clipped into the carabiner. So this carabiner is locked. Nothing will get clipped into this. I pass all these strands through the carabiner, right? And then I flip it over the carabiner. And look, I could barely tie an overhand in that, but look at all this extra room I have when I do a girth hitch. So the girth hitch is pretty quick and slick. I only use it. It has some downsides. I'm not scared of it, but it's only really makes sense to use when I just can't tie that overhand. So I'll tie a girth hitch master point. So that's another tip to make your material longer. Use a less bulky knot. Cool. Another tip to make your material longer. Let's say you came to here. I just can't quite tie my overhand. Well, take one of your points and extend it down with a quick draw or an alpine draw. And the bar tack is actually what's in the way here. So I'm going to get that up on my longest leg, which is usually what I try and do. And now I have enough to tie that. So you could potentially just add in one sling or one piece of material, alpine draw or something, to get that. So the question is, doing a twist or something in the girth hitch, is it necessary? So it does make it slip at a higher force, the twist. I never do it. I'm just being honest with you. I think if you're learning it for the first time, yeah, I'd probably recommend, because whenever it comes to these really edge case scenarios, so for this to be an issue, so the problem with the girth hitch master point, the question is it actually redundant? Because there's no knot tied here. So if this material gets cut or damaged, this is all just hitched, not tied. And so if I apply a steady high load to this, this will eventually start slipping through. Now, that's not how we apply loads in climbing. We apply a sudden high impulse load and then it's done. Um, and so by adding a twist, and it's like taking these strands and twisting them, you make it resist more load should this cut if it slips. And so I think you should do it. Now, it's if this and if this cuts and we're applying a long form, long load or heavy load to it, super, super unlikely, both of those things, then it's going to matter. And so that's a really edge case scenario. And when I think of those things, if it's games of what if, it's basically what does it cost me to actually do it? If it cost me an extra minute to put the twist, I probably wouldn't do it because it's such a fringe case scenario. But since it cost me kind of nothing to do it, then I'm going to protect against that fringe case scenario because it cost me nothing, right? And that's how I think about some of these things in climbing. It's like, well, should I worry? Like, should I protect against that? Well, what does it cost you to protect against that? And what are the odds of you needing to end up in that situation? And that's kind of how I help balance those things. So great question. Okay, adding a draw. Okay, another thing we can do is we can potentially enchain carabiners. And so this is going to be interesting for some folks possibly, but maybe this is I keep dropping all my stuff. Maybe it's, I'm trying to kind of hurry and trying to do less re-rigging, but I can enchain carabiners like maybe this. This is a carabiner to a carabiner. This is metal on metal. Oh my gosh, you're not supposed to do metal on metal, right? Look, that gave me this beautiful anchor and no material, right? It comes kind of nicely to one point. Now this also happens to work like that, which we'll get to. Just a master carabiner. This is common on rigged rappel anchors, but I could do it on cams as well. And I've done this. I actually shared a story, which was my anchor that incorporated this. Again, I'm showing it on two pieces, but you could apply it, you could apply it to three pieces and more, right? So it's like, maybe enchaining a carabiner. Now, I don't need to do it this way, but I could do this. And I know alarm bells are ringing for some of you because you've never seen this before or perhaps you've been taught that you shouldn't. And sorry if it's not coming out clear there, but I have these two cams. I've been chained two carabiners together. Crazy. Super non-textbook. And I would probably opposite and oppose these. That would be, definitely want to do that. So why we try not to do this in general climbing is because this happens. If there's a twist, it's really easy for those to unclip. So we don't want to do that when we're leading above this because we have that potential for that to come undone. But when we're doing it on an anchor, it's a different situation. We're not leading above this. We are sitting here observing this. I'm sitting here belaying from beneath it. Okay? So sometimes I can enchain carabiners. I showed two examples of that. I'm up to 10. I've only got 10 minutes until I hit my time. I don't know how I do that every time. So, okay, another one, I can make my material longer, right? So this is all material longer because I could be using a sling in here instead of going up and down, up and down, up and down. I'm just using this as one point. So another thing you can do is clip cams together. I can clip this carabiner into this sling, and then I treat this as one point. I can clip this carabiner into this carabiner, okay, and treat them as one point. I can, right, and sometimes, right, you have one good crack, you place two pieces, and they're kind of sitting right next to each other right here. So you can find a way to utilize them, right? I can take this and go up through this carabiner and the thumb loop, right? And that's going to be nice and high. Is it perfectly equalized? No, it doesn't have to be. If things had to be perfectly equalized for us to survive, we'd all be dead if you've climbed multi-pitch. So clipping cams together. Now I do want to warn against what's called ring loading the thumb loop of a cam, because I've heard some recent reports that that fails kind of low, still reasonably high. And so this would be an example of ring loading a thumb loop is what I mean by, there we go. Ring loading would be like this on a thumb loop. And so if this cam were to fail, this thumb loop would be ring loaded. Now, if this fails, then this is ring loaded and can possibly fail. The numbers I was seeing as like 4 kilonewtons. Again, sustained load. So if this fails and we get a sustained load over 4 kilonewtons, this could fail, which could cause this to fail. But that's only 2 parts of my 3-part anchor probably. So, but something to be aware of. I've definitely done a lot of ring loading or like clipping of a thumb loop like that, but none of my gear ever rips out of my anchors. So cool. So clip in carabiners together. All right. Rapid fire. How to make a sling shorter. Cut it. Don't carry 30 feet of cord. Don't carry 20 feet of cord. Maybe you just carry 12 feet of cord because you have this super long cord, which is the climbing rope, and you can utilize the climbing rope. So that's a tip. I might run out of time to even give my tallies, my little... Great. Okay. Another way to make a piece of material is shorter. Shorter is really important when we're trying to do this, high master point, and not having to grab a bunch of stuff off our harness and put things back, etc. So another style, something I call the W rig. So instead of, I'm trying to make my material shorter, so I'm going to need something longer for this. So I'm going to grab my triple length. We'll see if that works. Right, I grab this, oh shit, it's kind of long. All right, I'm gonna do what I call a W rig. Instead of clipping to this point, I was gonna show an extra trick, but I won't. Carabiner. Instead of clipping 1 strand, I'm gonna clip 2 strands. Right, you see where I get the name W, right? I clipped 2 strands, not just 1. And that's going to eat up a bunch of material. And this is now a triple length sling. We're using the exact same points we used with the double length sling. And yet we're ending up with the master point in the exact same location. So if I grab the triple off my harness, I can use this technique and make it work with a nice high master point instead of putting the triple away, grabbing the double, etc. So that's the kind of W rig. And then another style, which I'll just show, kind of the same concept that I'll just show on these 2 points, is this N rig, right? Here's the N. So we have this N shape. Maybe I'll show this a little bit higher so you can see it better. I'll do it through, let's see if this works. So here's the end of the material. That's going to go into my finger here. And this is where I'm going to tie my knot. So that is the N rig. Right? And so it's double clipping the strand. This is double clipped. This is single clipped. So you could apply that concept further and further and further with a super long cord. You could double clip everything, you know, and shorten it up a bunch. Another way to shorten up a piece of material, right? It's going to help me with my high master point. Hopefully you guys are starting to think like, huh, I could, you know, to get creative, right? Again, I've read none of this stuff in a book. I seriously think I've read none of it in a book. I'm not a big fan of the new Climbing Anchors book, I will say. Boom, quadruple length sling. I just doubled it up. Guess what? Now it's a double length sling. Sick. So I can treat it like a double length and it's now shorter. You know, if this is all I have on my harness, I can make it work. I can get a nice high master point, nice and comfortable. So doubling material up, 15. We might not make it to 30. Okay, another thing I can do to shorten things up is I can add a knot to it. Now there's 2 ways I could add a knot to it. Quadruple length sling, way too long for me to nicely, now this is kind of normally clipped, right? If I tie, this is way down here. It's just a 2-piece. So here's a way I can shorten it up. Watch this. I already clip it. I pull a bunch of this slack through. I might have gone a little hard there. and then I tie a knot. Check this out. Just an overhand knot in the sling. And I basically just cut this out as if it doesn't exist. Boom, quadruple length sling, but I just shorten that up with a knot. Now, it might be hard to undo that knot later, but it's usually not so bad. And I usually don't do it to this of egregious where I'm doing it like 4 feet, but I'm doing it to like shorten things up a little bit. So I can tie knots like that. I can also tie knots, you know, I mentioned earlier you can like clove hitch and how that shortened things up. And I would say this is a method. I'm not going to give myself the tally for it because it really only shortened things like a half an inch, an inch. And I don't care about a half inch. That's not what I'm worried about. I'll just let that fly. I'll leave that slack in there. It's not that big of a deal because my life doesn't depend on equalization. My life depends on the solid gear I placed. It doesn't matter if there's that little bit. So, cool. All right, another way we can shorten things up, I'll keep using the quad length. Let's see, I'll go with 3 here. And I think this is still going to be quite long, kind of off the screen here. So if I just tie an overhand here, it's going to be kind of low. And I want it to be high. I want it to be more comfortable to work off. So I can do a figure 8, right? A figure 8's going to take more material. That's one more wrap. Well, check this out. I can go another wrap around. We call that a figure 9. Doesn't look like much. It looks kind of ugly. And guess what? I can go another wrap around. We call that a figure 10. And I can actually keep wrapping. Now things start to get pretty ugly. And honestly, I don't like to go beyond figure 9. But that shortened it up. The overhand was down here. Now I've wrapped around and around. Figure 8, figure 9, figure 10. It starts to get really bulky and gross and a little hard to necessarily understand what's going on, but we can build a bulkier knot. So build a bulkier knot. I'll just give myself 1 tally, even though I showed you the figure 9 and the figure 10. Figure 11 plus, that gets kind of gross. We should probably be using a different method. Usually I use that one when I bring it down to 1 point and I'm just like, oh, I just want to eat up a little more material. I'll just give another wrap. Cool. Firing through. I'm going to run a little over time to get through a few more of these, but I think this one's really cool. And this one is what I use in a cordelette when I'm trying to make my cordelette shorter. And this one's one you kind of have to play with and maybe like you could do this one wrong. So I'm going to clip. So this again is an open cordelette. Open ends, okay? And I'm going to clip some more stuff just so I can bring this a little more on the screen for you guys. Okay, let's say I want to start tying my master point here, but my open ends are all the way down here. There's still so much more material to go. So I'll take these are the 2 open ends. I'll take these, I'll hook them around my thumb here. These are my open ends, and I'll fold this back. And then give myself a little more. This is bulky. I'll fold that back, and now I have a ton of strands. I need a little more. So again, the open ends are here. I fold them back, and then I can tie. It's a very bulky knot because it's got extra strands in it. I can use a 20-foot, let me get a carabiner in here. I can use a 20-foot cordelette and just have these extra tails right there out the back of the knot. They don't matter. They don't need to exist. They don't need to be tied together. In fact, even if the tails were really short, I have all these other strands in the master point that are pulling my pieces together. So I call that kind of folding back a cordelette. That's a really, really cool one. But you have to make sure that you folded it back and all the strands are through your knot. you need to look out for tying a slip knot there. That's a mistake people have made and gotten in trouble with is accidentally tying a slip knot. Great. The last one I'll show you here, and I'll start to wrap up, because I think this one's really cool too, is I don't need, now, if these are, let's say these are my 3 points, which are pretty like nice and together, you know, near each other, I don't need to clip to here and then clip my sling to these points. I can have my what's going to be, I wish I could have my sling finish, let's say, like, watch, I'll shorten this up. That bar tack going to be a problem for me. Right? And I can have it finish just here. And then I can go through here as my master point, right? So this lines up with this quick link. And so I could just use this as my master point. My master point is now this sling and this quick link. And so I hit them both together and I clove into there. Now, obviously this is a 2 point, but the same concept can be applied to 3 points. And then I can belay. Of course, I can belay off of my clove, but that's lowering my master point. The whole point was to go as high as possible. I can go into that. So I can finish my master point. You know, it could even be 2 pieces up here. And then I finish my master point off of 2 pieces above the thumb loop of this cam. And then I go into the sling coming down from those 2 tied in a knot. I take that and I take the thumb loop of the cam, and that becomes my master point. So that's, I forgot to keep tallying, but I think I got a few more in there. I want to be respectful of the time I laid out, although, like I said, I will stick around and take more questions or just kind of keep rolling on these concepts. I have a few more I might share as I run into kind of extra time. Please stick around if you would like. But just to put a pin on that for folks who did need to leave at 3 minutes ago, it's hopefully you got some kind of creative ideas, but really just give stuff a try and think to yourself. I would say this is the most important. Again, solid is the most important, but when we're getting creative, we already have the bomber pieces in. Let's make sure your material's redundant. That if one of your strands fails, right, we have something else. So in this kind of wacky example, if this fails, well, I'm still on the bolt, right? And so that positive power of negative thinking. And yeah, build high anchors and high master points that are comfortable and nice to work off of, let you get into the stance. And don't stress about these little changes, little tweaks to try and take up a touch more of slack. Cool. So that's our time that I kind of allotted myself. And again, I did it. I always do it. I run myself out of time. But yeah, like I said, I'll kind of put a bow on this, but I'm going to stick around. So that was our time. I'll stay for Q&A or finish my material. Thanks for attending and thanks for sticking it out. We had 8 survivors here, which is pretty awesome. And please spread this information. Check out our other webinars. They're not necessarily all beginner topics. I could say almost all of them aren't beginner topics. And so this is kind of a really cool way to get this information, more intermediate, advanced information that you might not come back to a guide for, and just for us to get it out there. So share those. Think about this stuff. Work it into your experience and your knowledge base. And yeah, come join us at a clinic in person with Vertical Pursuits. Intro to Multi-Pitch this Sunday in Berkeley. Intro to Trad Saturday, January 10th at Cosumnes River Gorge. And then come join us in Mexico as well. I'll share a couple of links Thanks, Chris. Yeah, Chris has been out with us a bunch. Um, here's some links I'll chuck in the chat box that I just have ready to go here. Some of our events coming up, our previous webinars, if you'd like to give me a tip, and then that interview, that podcast interview with me. Cool. So feel free to sign off if you got somewhere to be, you have a family that loves you. Otherwise, I will take questions on any climbing topic, or if you guys would like me to dive a little deeper into any subject, or if no one's got anything to say, I'll keep rambling on. I had a few more things. Honestly, actually, just yeah, a couple of things here I was gonna add in. I think yeah. So I'll keep my eye on the chat box. Please, really, any topic in climbing. It could be about sport climbing. It could be, I don't have any bouldering tips, but it could be more philosophical based. Anything like that, feel free to ask. I'll just kind of keep firing through some of the stuff. Cool. Awesome. Good. Some great questions. So I'll just finish this out. A couple more things, and I'll get to your questions. So another concept, I don't have to use the carabiner all the way down here. I can use this up here. And so that effectively makes my material, brings my master point higher. So I don't have to use this. I can use all the way up here, right? And that's gonna raise things up. And I think that kind of closes out my set of how to make things shorter, turn things shorter to bring things higher. I showed building no material anchors, so rappel rigged bolts. Like these are rappel rigged bolts, right? And so often those might already come to one point, but often you can just, right, do this. Now, ideally, this isn't pulling the carabiner apart like this. Like I'd say I wouldn't go more than this, right? They're kind of coming to one point. But you can always, like I showed before, add a single, non-locker, and that often removes the concern that you're triaxially loading the carabiner. So that's a no material anchor. And then, yeah, sometimes cams come together really nicely and you don't need to add any material. You can just kind of go through the slings, maybe for two of them. Where'd that other number 2 go? Here it is. Right, and again, I'm demoing this on 2 pieces, but you might clip these together as one and incorporate it in. The last things I had were about incorporating the rope into the anchor, which is a bit of a difficult topic to show here, so maybe I'll cut that out. But the rope is our longest piece of material and strongest piece of material. And so worthwhile thing to have some tools for incorporating it. We often use those around trees, around boulders, or we might use it to incorporate one piece of gear that's way far away, which we often do if we can't find enough gear placements right in front of us. I'll keep climbing 5 feet, get the good piece, clip that good piece, and then climb back down, right? And then find a way to incorporate that. I'm getting all tangled up down here, right? Incorporate that into my other pieces of gear that I've placed. So, I might tie it like that. I mean, there's just a million different ways. I could take these 2 and then clip them into this knot, right? And then I've got a master point to belay off of. So utilizing the rope for that far away piece. Cool. So those are my last 2 tips. It looks like we had some cool questions come in. Awesome. Let's see. stick around. Do you happen to have a link to your carabiner types discussion? Maybe I'll just do it. I don't think I have. Maybe I've gotten into it in one of my webinars, but it's something I've usually just talked with people about. I think I only have two of our shapes with me right here, which are the two most common. But carabiners have different shapes. You've probably noticed this. Our two primary shapes are these right here. This is what we call a modified D shape, but essentially we can just call it a D-shaped carabiner. This is the strongest shape for a carabiner. Anything I put in here is going to be pulled into this point right here. And that point is aligned close to the spine, and the spine of the carabiner is stronger than the gate side because the gate side has all these weak, possibly weak links, these potentials for shifting and stuff like that, right? And so anything I put in here gets forced to the spine, which is what makes this shape super strong, which is why on every single one of your quick draws is two modified D-shaped carabiners. Now these are non-lockers. Whether it's a locker or not has nothing to do with the shape, right? So, and then on all your cams, you're going to have modified D-shaped carabiners. You can always tell by that point. Some are a little more subtle, and there are some carabiners that are starting to blend. And so this is the strongest shape, so this is what we should use most of the time. We should have a reason why we're not using this. Now, I should have caveated this whole discussion with carabiner shapes aren't critically important. If you mess up your carabiner shapes, it's probably not going to cause you any problems. But there's a reason, and as we progress in our climbing, there's a reason things are designed a certain way, and we have them with us, so let's use them for the right thing. So when it comes to lockers, you know, modified D, that's what we would put on, you know, a nut or a singular anchor point. You don't need to because you have two other anchor points or whatever. This is what we would use for our PAS or our tether. This is what we would use, excuse me, for our prusik on our third hand. Anything where we're kind of clipping one thing in, basically. The HMS shape, you'll notice it doesn't have that point. If I hold it kind of flat here, if I go like that, it'll look like it has a point, but really this is how it's oriented. This is also called a pear-shaped carabiner. You don't find non-lockers of this. And so this carabiner, a lot of people think this is strong, but it's actually a weaker shape than the D. And we use this mostly when we are running two ropes, right? Because if I put two ropes into here, they're going to fight for this position at the peak. And so this doesn't have a peak, and so the two ropes sit nicely next to each other. So rappelling, we use this ideally, not this. This is what we rappel on. We use our ATC on. This is what we'll tie a clove hitch in when we're cloving into an anchor, because I've made a mess of things. Because those two strands will sit next to each other nicely, and if I need to make an adjustment, they slide next to each other really nicely. Now, again, to reiterate, like it's not unsafe to use a D-shaped carabiner. It's just not quite nice for it. It doesn't it doesn't cinch up as nice. If I go to make an adjustment, it's going to fight me a little more, but it's really not that big of a deal. But again, they have their shapes for a reason. Munter hitch, for example, will tie on this. If you don't know what a munter hitch is, mostly comes in self-rescue situations, but it's a hitch you can belay with. Super cool. Yeah, that's the basic spiel. There's also oval-shaped carabiners. Oh, I do have one here. Oval shape, very symmetrical. This is actually, I believe, the weakest of the shapes. These are best. I don't have anything sitting here, but these hold devices really well. And what I mean by that is like a micro traction for top rope soloing or for hauling. These sit really nicely right here, really nice and symmetrically, as opposed to on a D, they'll get forced into this corner and it's kind of awkward. Actually, my biggest The biggest thing with this, so we belay ATC with this, even though there's only one rope running through, it just feeds much smoother as opposed to having this corner pinching up under your ATC. Now you should be belaying probably on a gree-gree, and a gree-gree should be on a D-shaped carabiner. It's extremely common that people have their gree-grees on HMS style carabiners because we belay on an ATC with this, and so people think this is a belay carabiner. So then they start belaying on a gree-gree, and they put their belay carabiner on their gree-gree. But it's not a belay carabiner. It's a carabiner that's runs smooth, has ropes run smoothly over it, has multiple ropes in it nicely. And so the manufacturer, Petzl, recommends you have a D-shaped carabiner on your gree-gree. Again, it doesn't matter, but you asked. You asked for it. Chris got it. So hopefully that's an answer. There's some fun kind of weird like in-betweeny things. Like, but anyway, I'm not going to get more in the weeds, but it's a bit of a rant of mine. But I think as we progress in our climbing, we should really understand the tools we're using. Cool. And then Amy asked, what guides do I look up to? This is a really interesting question. I'll have to think about it. I'd say in general, I'm not much of a looker up to her. Maybe I've met enough of my heroes that I see them as very human. I'll say, so I am a trained guide. I'm a certified guide. I don't actually really like the term guide. And I don't, there's nothing wrong with the term. I don't think of myself as a guide. I'm a teacher, really. When I go climbing with folks and what I offer to people, yes, I guide and I take people up rock climbs, but I prefer to teach. And that's kind of what we prefer to do at Vertical Pursuits is teach a person to fish, right? So that they can eat fish for the rest of their life, as opposed to, giving them the fish. And so I look up to people who instruct, people who teach. And I think I think a lot of guides are actually really not good at that. And it's not emphasized really in our training through the AMGA. I'll say that straight up. Being a good instructor is not emphasized. So people who I've found who are really good instructors, I'm always really impressed by people who work in how would you phrase it? Like outdoor education spaces. So like at colleges and universities, I'm always really impressed with how they present material and like their lesson planning. And I'm always just blown away by that. And I find that I'm such a, clunky monkey by comparison. But yeah, there's downsides to that as well. But I find they present in a very tidy style, and I think that's really cool. So there's a lot of guides doing really, really cool stuff in climbing, of course, that I could point out. But yeah, I don't know. I need more time to think about that. Whenever I'm at the end of a webinar, my brain's kind of fried because I'm like been talking the whole time. But yeah, thanks, Amy. I don't know if you've been to webinars before, Amy, but thanks for being engaged and asking great questions. That was awesome. Oh, okay, cool. Right on. Welcome back then. Cool. Well, I won't hold everybody any longer if we don't have any more questions. There will be a recording of this. Obviously, you've seen it, but it's going to go on YouTube with our other webinars. Feel free to reach out to us. If you have any questions in climbing, I'm just happy to be kind of support. I might not be able to get back to you right away, but I will try and get back to you. I know this can be a confusing. We're at the point in climbing where there's so much information out there, and I guess I'm adding to it. If you can't beat them, join them. But I'm hoping that this longer form content, you can kind of sink your teeth into it a little bit more, maybe get a little bit more context, and yeah, hopefully it was valuable. I know it was a really like rapid fire and I started to rush a little bit. So my apologies there.